Have you ever noticed how advertisements for items you recently searched for online seem to pop up on your social media? It's almost like they're reading your mind, and sometimes you end up clicking on them. In today's fast-paced world, online shopping has completely transformed how we access goods and services. However, this digital convenience is not without its risks.
A young man receives a message from a potential buyer interested in purchasing the iMac he listed on a second-hand transaction app. Following the buyer's request, the man shares his address and phone number. Soo-hyun, an ordinary office worker at a construction firm, finds herself facing unexpected challenges at work, including dealing with her sleazy, overbearing boss. After reporting a construction error that deviates from the project plan, Kim, the firm's chief, expresses his disappointment in her performance. To make matters worse, he constantly harasses her, calling her honey, a nickname she finds offensive. Taking responsibility for the mistake, Soo-hyun explains that she was off work that day to move into a new apartment. Despite the challenges, the one bright spot in her life is her loyal friend and colleague, Dalja, who supports her through thick and thin. On the way home, Soo-hyun shares that her washing machine broke during the move. Dalja suggests she look for a reasonably priced replacement on a second-hand goods site or app, as it might offer better deals and quality options. In the next scene, the young man selling his iMac is visited by the buyer, who claims his sister couldn't come and sent him instead. After a quick inspection, the buyer confirms the product is in good condition, and agrees to pay the requested amount. However, as the young man begins checking the cash, the buyer suddenly stabs him, killing him mercilessly. What started as a hopeful sale ends with the tragic loss of the young man's life. The buyer then lists all the victims' belongings online using different accounts, platforms, and apps, offering them at reasonable prices, with the excuse of an urgent sale due to moving overseas. This marks the beginning of a chain of events that will devastate the lives of multiple individuals, highlighting the darker side of digital convenience. Following the trend, Soo-hyun comes across a used washing machine listed on an app at a reasonable price, marked as an urgent sale due to moving overseas. Unbeknownst to her, the account used for the listing belongs to the deceased young man. On her way to work, Soo-hyun confirms the purchase, driven by the low price and her urgent need. Little does she know, this single decision will plunge her life into chaos in the coming days. The same day, the washing machine is delivered, but to her dismay, it won't power on. The installer suspects it might be part of a scam where damaged products are sold to unsuspecting buyers. When Soo-hyun attempts to contact the seller, she discovers their account has disappeared, leaving her to realize she's been scammed. Seeking justice, she turns to the police, but they dismiss her concerns, adding to her frustration. Detectives Na and Ju explain that their resources are stretched thin, due to an overwhelming number of phishing and online banking fraud cases, meaning her case will take time to investigate. Frustrated by the lack of help with the scam and her worsening life circumstances, Soo-hyun decides to take matters into her own hands. Through determined effort, she identifies what appears to be the same scammer using multiple fake profiles to target other victims. Taking the moral high ground, she begins warning potential buyers online, cautioning them against falling for the same trap she did. Soo-hyun starts leaving comments on his posts, exposing him as a fraud and disrupting his scams. This infuriates the scammer, whose true identity remains unknown. Worried about losing his schemes, he warns Soo-hyun to delete her comments. However, she refuses to back down and instead warns him that she has already reported him to the police. Angered by her defiance, the scammer, with a sinister agenda, sets out to make Soo-hyun's already difficult life exponentially worse. The next morning, Soo-hyun arrives late to work, giving her sleazy boss an opportunity to trouble her yet again. Under the guise of enforcing work ethics, he continues to hit on her and unnecessarily singles her out for criticism. Meanwhile, throughout the day, Soo-hyun receives a barrage of mysterious calls from strangers, asking about a free washer she supposedly listed online. To her shock, she later discovers that the post was indeed made from her account, with her phone number listed as the contact. That night, she returns home exhausted from the day's work, and is startled by a random food delivery arriving at her door at odd hours. The delivery person insists she placed the order, though she clearly didn't. The following day, she reports the incidents to the police once more, but they provide little help, as there's no direct evidence linking the events to the scammer. Detective Ju advises Soo-hyun to change her phone number, and avoid provoking the scammer while the investigation continues. Determined to help, Detective Ju visits Soo-hyun's apartment to review the CCTV footage, but no signs of the scammer are found. Just as the food delivery sequence plays out again, Ju witnesses firsthand the harassment and emotional distress Soo-hyun is enduring. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he decides to personally intervene and begin tailing the scammer. As advised by the police, Soo-hyun changes her phone number, hoping this will stop the scammer from troubling her. Despite her chaotic life, her best friend Dalja continues to be a source of support. However, Dalja has her own challenges, including a suspicious husband who might accuse her of having an affair if she spends too much time away from home. Torn between helping Soohyun and prioritizing her family, Dalja reluctantly leaves. The next morning, as Soohyun heads to work, she notices a CCTV technician fixing cameras near her apartment door. The technician explains that he's there to install cameras as part of the apartment building's new regulations. Given the recent events, Soohyun doesn't question it and accepts the explanation. Later at work, Soohyun receives a message from her mom, starting with casual conversation about her new apartment. The message asks her to transfer money online, claiming her mom's credit card isn't working, and she needs to buy a new air conditioner. Before completing the transaction, Soohyun feels uneasy and decides to call her mom to confirm, but her call doesn't go through. At that moment, she realizes the truth: the scammer has hacked into her phone. It becomes clear that the scammer has access to all her personal information and can now manipulate her life at will. The scammer's behavior grows even more disturbing. That night, while Soohyun is alone in her apartment, she hears the door lock beep from the outside. Rushing to check, she finds a stranger standing at the door, asking for casual sex, mistakenly thinking she invited him. When Soohyun refuses to let him in, the man attempts to force the door open, claiming her boyfriend sent him for a one-night stand. Fearing for her safety, Soohyun calls the police, reporting an intruder. Frustrated, the man eventually leaves. The incident leaves Soohyun devastated, and she collapses in tears. As she tries to regain her composure, she receives a message from the scammer, demanding 5 million won within 5 minutes in exchange for stopping his harassment. Traumatized and desperate, Soohyun briefly considers paying the ransom, but then hesitates. Shortly after, the door code beeps again, and another man appears, repeating the same request for a one-night stand. Overwhelmed by the relentless harassment, Soohyun breaks down in tears, unable to endure any longer. Just then, Detective Ju arrives in time to intervene, apprehending the stranger, and bringing an end to the cycle of harassment for the night. During interrogation, the man reveals he received the door code from someone online through a used goods app. This person, pretending to be Soohyun's boyfriend, also sent the man her address along with a video, claiming to show Soohyun with another man. The series of tormenting events continues to unravel Soohyun's life, as her personal information is completely exposed. The scammer now has full access to her digital platforms, and this nightmare is far from over. Accompanied by Detective Ju, Soohyun visits the washer seller's home, pretending they are following up on a potential missing persons report. The apartment owner leads them to the seller's room, only to find it completely empty, with no sign of the seller or his belongings. However, they soon spot a large deep freezer, where they make a shocking discovery: the seller's body, preserved inside. This grim find prompts the police to launch an official investigation to track down the killer, who they soon realize is the scammer. The police secure the area and begin their investigation, but they find no useful evidence, no fingerprints or other clues that could help solve the murder. This unexpected turn of events leaves Soohyun even more traumatized, as she becomes consumed with fear, believing she is constantly being watched and could be attacked at any moment. Meanwhile, Detective Ju and his partner, Detective Na, continue their investigation. They start tracking the call history of the deceased young man, and consult other police stations about online used goods fraud cases. Some of these cases are linked to murder, but had been overlooked due to a lack of evidence or leads. One night, after returning from work, Soohyun notices signs that someone has been in her apartment while she was gone. Fresh water marks on the shower glass suggest the intruder used the shower. Upon further inspection, she realizes the intruder also used her kitchen. Just as she's processing this, she sees her home PC suddenly begin operating on its own. It becomes clear that the scammer has gained remote access to her computer, and has likely planted devices inside her home to spy on her. The police arrive, but despite their efforts, they find no fingerprints or any other evidence that could aid the investigation. Detective Na informs the scammer had removed the SD card from the camera outside her door, making it impossible to gather more footage. The relentless harassment takes a severe toll on Soohyun's mental and physical health, to the point where she is hospitalized, overwhelmed by the constant fear and stress caused by the scammer's unending attacks. After being discharged from the emergency room, Soohyun receives a call from the scammer, who now demands a staggering 10 million won to stop torturing her. He also instructs her to turn off her phone. Detective Ju arrives at her apartment to check on her, as she hasn't been answering calls. Meanwhile, Detective Na finally tracks the last call made from the victim's phone number. Upon investigating the call's location, Detective Na discovers that the scammer has been outside Soohyun's apartment, monitoring her every move. Back near the apartment, Detective Ju is suddenly attacked by the scammer, who is wearing a helmet. The two engage in a struggle. As Detective Na tries to update Ju on his findings, he is unable to reach him. The scammer then attacks Ju with chloroform, knocking him unconscious, before heading into Soohyun's apartment. Just as the scammer is about to enter Soohyun's unit, Kim, her sleazy boss, appears from the shadows, hoping to impress her. Kim identifies the attacker as the scammer responsible for harassing Soohyun. However, it's the wrong time for Kim, and the price he pays for his sleazy behavior is brutal. The scammer stabs him to death. Later, Soohyun returns to her apartment, unaware that the scammer has already entered. As she relaxes on the couch, she suddenly stops when something catches her eye on the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, she discovers that CCTV cameras have been installed throughout her apartment, even in her bedroom. As she continues to investigate, she finds her boss, Kim, lying dead on the balcony. Before she can process the situation, the back door creaks open. Frozen in fear, Soo-hyun stands motionless as the scammer approaches her from behind. Gathering what little courage she has left, she tries to flee, but the scammer attacks her. To her shock, the scammer turns out to be the seemingly harmless CCTV technician, who had visited her apartment to install the cameras. Just then, Detective Na arrives at the apartment and finds his partner, Detective Ju, unconscious inside his car. Panicking, Na rushes towards the apartment, only to realize that it's too late. The scammer has already captured Soo-hyun, and drives out of the parking in her car. Detective Na immediately gives chase, and soon, Ju regains consciousness and joins the pursuit, following the suspect's vehicle carrying Soo-hyun. The chase intensifies, weaving through the narrow streets of the congested city, with Detective Ju trailing closely behind. Detective Na eventually manages to catch up to the suspect's car, but the scammer continues to speed away. Suddenly, a truck crashes into both vehicles, causing a fatal accident. Detective Ju hurries to help his partner, but the crash has already claimed his life. Meanwhile, the scammer manages to escape, leaving behind an unconscious and barely alive Soo-hyun. Once again, she is left to endure endless torment, her life spiraling into a nightmare. Days pass, and the scammer has not contacted Soo-hyun, but she remains paralyzed with fear, knowing that her nightmare is still out there, lurking. Meanwhile, Detective Ju is left feeling helpless, as he has no evidence or footage of the scammer to help track him down. One evening, while traveling on a public metro, Soo-hyun overhears a passenger talking about a post for used goods, labeled urgent sale due to moving overseas. This takes her back to the first time she saw a similar post online. Realizing the connection, she immediately calls Detective Ju, and they come up with a plan to lure the scammer to them. Together with detectives Ju and Dalja, Soo-hyun sets a trap by creating a fake account to attract the scammer. As the bait, Soo-hyun volunteers to pose as the buyer, knowing she is the only one who has seen the scammer's face. Following the plan, Soo-hyun begins executing it with precision. Armed with knowledge of how the scammer operates and his tactics, she starts buying various used goods online, preparing to bait him. After the loss of his partner, Detective Ju now has a personal stake in the case. After multiple interactions, one evening, the scammer finally catches Soo-hyun off guard, just as Detective Ju gets stuck in traffic. Seeing the killer face-to-face leaves Soo-hyun shaken and terrified, but she manages to keep her composure. At first, the scammer doesn't recognize her, but as Soo-hyun behaves nervously and oddly, he begins to grow suspicious. Sticking to the plan, Soo-hyun tells him she needs to inspect the product first to ensure it's not faulty. The scammer, falling for the ruse, agrees to wait outside her house while she checks the item. Back at the house, Soo-hyun urgently contacts Detective Ju, asking him to hurry, but the scammer suddenly attacks her, knocking her unconscious with chloroform. Afterward, he begins to tour her apartment, but something feels off. Realizing that it isn't her actual home, he figures out it's a trap. Before he can react, Soo-hyun manages to trap him in a room, but the psychopath breaks free. Now, her life hangs in the balance. The scammer prepares to kill her but is interrupted by a surprise. Everything is being recorded, and if he kills her, the police will easily trace him. This infuriates him even more, and he readies to stab her. Just then, Detective Ju bursts in, and a fierce struggle ensues. The scammer manages to stab Ju, gaining the upper hand by repeatedly striking him with a heavy spanner, leaving Ju badly beaten and unconscious. As the scammer prepares to kill him, Soo-hyun attacks from behind with a nail gun, redirecting his focus back to her. In a fit of anger, the scammer knocks her down with a single blow and grabs a knife, intent on ending her life and silencing the only witness. With his remaining strength, Detective Ju lunges at the scammer, pushing him out the balcony, and both fall onto a vehicle, severely injured. Despite his injuries, the scammer fights back with all his might, but Soo-hyun manages to grab his arm, and Detective Ju suffocates him to death, just as the scammer had done to his victims. In the end, the duo prevails, putting an end to the scammer's reign of terror. Detective Ju avenges his fallen partner, and Soo-hyun finds closure, finally at peace for the rest of her life.